Hi, welcome to Self-Generated. My name is Steve. I am the host and creator of this series, this online discussion podcast, whatever you want to call it. And we're in our last episode this week exploring the ideas of being an NPC or a human NPC, or when human behavior seems to act like an NPC. And that we've had a few episodes before this. If you missed them, I really advise you go circle back, have a listen, mainly because recaps suck and is just kind of its own little standalone conversation and exploration. And we're going to be going on to perception next week. But to wrap up the idea of exploring that maybe our free will isn't what we think, that sometimes people act in really weird ways, like they don't even think like a human being, and that they're just regurgitating what they believe to be true, and that you're just in groups and that they're stupid and all these other things that we don't really, or that we believe and that we kind of think, but it's mainly because we don't understand how we actually work. And that another part of that is that sometimes people talk about simulation theory. I don't know if you heard of this, but that we all live in a simulation, and that maybe, just maybe, some of these people are in fact NPCs, like real deal, no bullshit NPCs. And I'm not talking about the TikTok NPCs. Have you seen these people? I'm going to try to find some and put here, but they will have NPC-like behavior for the little money gifts or whatever on Twitch and shit. And that's totally fucking different. That's something else. What I'm talking about is the people that when you interact with them online or in the real world, it almost feels like they're operating in their own reality. Most of what they have to say and how they have to interact is really only in reinforcing what they already believe to be true, and that things that conflict with that, they act as though that's a threat, and shit usually goes downhill from there. And when I talk about this, and I talk about the idea of simulation theory, is that I've had conversations with friends about this, is like, do we live in a simulation? You've had Elon Musk bring it up, and that when you talk about all these AI and all this, and that, maybe, just maybe, we are all part of this computer simulation. But I, understanding active inference, embodied cognition, and the extended mind, realize that doesn't fucking matter. Why? Well, you and I, this experience right now, you experiencing me right now, is for you a simulation. The light that's coming off of this, the light that's coming off of here, in through the lens, turned into an electronic signal, sent to your device, projected, your eyes then receive it, it gets converted into an electrical signal when it hits your receptors in the back of your eye. The audio, same thing. It goes through the air, or through your earbuds, through the air, into the three little bones in your ear, into the cochlea, which has about 10,000 hairs, and it's about the size of a pea. And the movement of those little hairs are encoded as a signal that's sent into the blackness of the brain. That signal is not labeled. What happens, your experience of everything is a simulation of what the sensory information is believed to be, based off of prior experience. You speak English, you understand what I'm saying is English. If I were to move my mouth and another language were to come out, it would only be experienced as sound.
维基百科只有你百科全
I might have to edit that out. But the point is that this experience that you have, you don't hear the words and then translate them and do all this. The experience you have is that you hear it as a known word, as language, as a person speaking to you. That there's all of these things that are layered into that experience that aren't part of the sensory information. They're part of your past. That I'm a dude, that I have long hair, that I got a janky face, whatever, right? That the audio needs to be this way, the lighting needs to be this way. No matter what you're taking in, I'm just referencing me right now because that's the only thing I have to reference to you, or whatever this is, right? Now, that thing is that you're taking in, you're processing it, and you're experiencing it as an image, but it's just this light bouncing off that goes into your eye that then's converted into electrical signal. And because you have a past history of knowing angles and colors and what things are, you experience it differently. And if you truly don't know what it is, a lot of times we express or experience surprise and discomfort because we're creatures of prediction. That your experience is not a direct reflection of reality. It is a simulation of reality based off of your sensory information and past experience. Is that a little different than what you think or what you thought? Well, that is in no small part what helps explain people who are lost in the NPC-ness, because what they believe to be true, the certainty that they apply, is what helps us notice them. And what do I mean by that? Is the certainty that they apply, and what helps us notice them is that they need this thing to be true, and that's why they're projecting it onto you, or that they need this large group to help reinforce it, that they need to do all of these things to continually perpetuate it. Let's talk about something outside of NPC-ness, but somebody or a group that needs to perpetuate, like say a fanboydom or a fandom, is that if you stop perpetuating that, if you stop hanging out in groups and you stop doing all these other things, you forget about it. Like us growing up, we forget about our toys and all of these other things and aspects of our childhood, unless we go back into a circle. And especially with the internet now, you can find that. It'll allow you to continually reinforce this framework, this model of what you want to be true. That these toys were the best, that this era was the best, that this movie was the best, that this theme was the best. It's all the same thing. People who sample the world in that way reinforce what you need to be true. And we gravitate that like moths to a flame. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but what I essentially want to end this with, or what I want to end this particular look at the idea of NPC-ness, people acting like NPCs in our real world, is that it's a reflection of us seemingly not understanding our true actual nature of how we fundamentally work as creatures of active inference, embodied cognition, the extended mind, instead of being semi-magical, perfectly rational non-computers in the universe, or whatever the fuck we are. And that most other explanations are exceedingly lacking, and that you might, we're going to have to address it later, but things like even institutions of psychology, they just don't have those explanations. They don't have the explanations of identity and consciousness, and they end up medicalizing a lot of normal human behavior that if we were to stop and be able to fundamentally prove that what I'm saying, or at least the ideas of active inference, are true, and that it's a framework that we can use to help manage ourselves throughout our lives, to be able to manage our own internal feelings, sensations, beliefs, we could be so much more empowered. We would actually be far closer to the story of being a free-willed individual than the actuality of how we live. But we don't do it. We don't do it because, again, if we're creatures of active inference, if I challenge your view of the world, you're mostly going to be able to handle it as a threat, unless you're trained or willing to handle ideas that are uncomfortable, and then be able to engage with them and challenge them and prove if it's true. If it's not true, great. There's ways in which we can engage, and you can ask questions, and you should be able to prove if it's not true. Obviously, there's some limitations, but I'm saying with this idea, I think definitively you can. So why am I stressing this, doing this entire podcast and series, and why am I talking about NPCs and showing my face in this particular run? Is because I believe that it's incredibly important, and that its core is because in no small part, this kind of negative NPC-ness, this inability to think individualistically, is being baked into us. And you don't need conspiracies. It's not necessarily the reptilians or they live, though it fucking could be. I don't know. I'm so over it right now, but I don't think it is. I think it's just us operating on what we believe to be true, because we're creatures of active inference that literally operate on stories. And that a lot of our suffering is legitimately just from that difference in our natural state versus this artificial state that we upkeep. And that, as complicated as it seems, as weird as it might seem, actually when you sit with it, you engage with it long enough, and it continues to survive challenge, you get to see it and you go, holy fucking shit, I can't believe I didn't see it otherwise. It explains why we have leaders in certain positions. It explains why we are the way we are. Because to a certain extent, this NPC-like behavior, we're making ourselves like that. We expect that, right? When you think of education, do you remember, when you think of education, did it make you the best individual possible? Do you recall all of the mathematical equations? Do you recall all of the historical instances, philosophy, government, or any of those things? vast majority of that stuff is long gone very shortly after we've left. Don't get me wrong, there are people who retain that, but the majority, no. But you know what you do remember? Remember to raise your hand, speak when spoken to, stand in line, respect authority, show up on time, work a particular shift, take some work home, bring it back, and follow the rules of order and literally stand in line and speak when spoken to. Those things we remember. And if extended mind is true, and I kind of bastardize the idea, but I talk about essentially that our environment and our world outside is intrinsic to how we think and who we are. And that being able to acknowledge that is part of life. And so, for example, if I were to say that putting somebody in a solitary confinement cell is more apt to make them worse than better, what kind of response would I get? Reasonable question is, yeah, maybe so. Maybe it does. But an NPC, meaning a person who can't have that conflicts with their idea, well, how are we going to punish them? You just want to let rapists off the street and give them candy or all sorts of crazy shit, right? Like I'll try to find something to relate, but it's just like off the wall, like it makes no sense. But it does make sense when, if you think about the framework I'm talking about, which is that what I'm saying that, oh, well, yeah, that is reasonable that if the environment is really small and it sucks, and these people are going to be eventually released and we're making them worse, that might be a bad thing. But because of foundationally, if this belief that challenges the foundational beliefs, like for whole your life, you've said X, Y, and Z, your dad believed this, and you would have to change that from being okay to being not okay because you're not aware of how things work, that idea will be a threat. And so that the only way to deal with that, because of this unknowing tussle that's happening inside, the error correction of this reasonable data that's coming in that's a threat versus the foundational understandings that actually make you, and then it's not just some rational decision, that it's this weird funky math actually happening, and that in order for them to quiet that, they go, well, this guy, fuck this guy, yada, yada, yada. That quiets the signal. And that all of a sudden, this behavior starts making a whole lot more sense. All of a sudden, I don't feel the need to be upset at this person. I don't get upset at this type of behavior when somebody doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. Right? Obviously, there's boundaries, but we're not there. And if I want to engage with somebody like that, I'm going to be far more successful if I'm not treating them like they're lesser than me. They can treat me like they're lesser. That's fine. Here's the real kicker, is that, again, in these online forums and chats and all these things, if I do it right, I haven't always done it right, but I try. If I do it right and I handle this person, it's not even about them. It's about everybody else who can see it. Because they're not lost in that moment. They have a better chance of seeing the perspective of like, whoa, what's happening here? This one person is just totally not in reality. And generally, when you see online, then the other person gets out of it. They're like, well, fuck this guy. He's so stupid. Ha, 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 ha. Bet he's in a basement. And again, that's all about satisfying yourself versus actually updating, understanding, engaging, and betterment. And so what we're going to try to do is figure out ways to truly empower ourselves by looking at these things from a different perspective. And that the person isn't stupid and being dumb and all these other negative things that don't fucking help. And they're not just an NPC. They're a human being who believes all of this shit. And they probably reasonably believe it because there's a bunch of other motherfuckers who believe it. And it's hard to say, oh, this is all wrong when you've done... How easy is it for you to believe it's okay when you're wrong? About anything. It doesn't matter how ridiculous it is. That scale doesn't make it any fucking easier. It makes it harder. The more ridiculous it is, the longer you got to play that hand. It is not easy to flip your script. Think of it with, for me, I was an alcoholic. I had to hit rock bottom. You have to get to a point where you can't go any further because you will continue to crawl and find alternatives to keep your bullshit going. That's not just an aspect of being an alcoholic. That's an aspect of being a creature of active inference without knowing it, without understanding what these things, these sensations that we feel, emotions and feelings that they're not just things happening to you, they're not just too much dopamine or some other fucking purely mechanical idea, that they're a reflection of how we model and understand our world, and that our sense of self and identity is a reflection of that, and how we experience is the dance in between of all that, between what's coming inside and how we perceive that. And those people who cannot continue to engage in a reasonable level with the information that's coming in act like NPCs. And a lot of times that's us. I'm telling you, it's you too. If you don't think it's you, if you feel very sure and you feel upset that I said that, I'm telling you 100% certainty, that's you right now. You're experiencing it as we speak. Because I'm a nobody. I don't matter. If you truly didn't care, if you truly didn't believe it in any way, shape, or form, you would feel nothing. It would just be nonsense. If you were tangentially or very close to it, maybe you would giggle or laugh or, oh shit, yeah. Because I also believe humor is an aspect of active inference, which I'll explain later. But I'm telling you that these sensations, these things that we experience, have different explanations, that your understanding can change how you interact with them, your world, your sense of self, other people, what love is, what sexual intimacy is. All of these things are just a little different if we work in a different way than just being this fucking magical agent of free will, which we don't feel like in any way. Or, okay, I don't feel like it in that way. And a lot of other people don't feel like in that way. And that it's very reasonable to feel that way. And to be quite honest, the explanations that I get from people who need to be their own NPC to explain how I am wrong in this, generally are more funny than not. But it is what it is. We all got to do our thing. But I fundamentally believe that if you are willing to explore yourself, other people, society, through the lens of active inference, embodied cognition, the extended mind, that you can see how things work in a different way that is more useful, closer to reality, and changes the way you actually feel and experience your world. No magic, no bullshit, no 12 steps, no nothing. It takes time. But first you have to be willing. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable. You have to be willing to explore ideas that don't match your own. And you have to be willing to let go of things that you have long held true. And we also explore how you actually do that. Not just the fucking words of change your mind or smile it away or some other horse shit. Now, this isn't your traditional setup, as you can tell. And it's not your traditional setup because I don't think a lot of those other ones are helpful. This is not just a fucking commodity. I'm having a conversation with you. And as soon as I try to commoditize it, I'm going to change it. And that's not to say I don't want money at some point, but what I'm saying is that there's some aspects of science that are like theories like media theory and medium theory, and that pretty much once you try to put the idea into a new medium or media, you change it innately. Like you can't share the same information via a news article that you would via TikTok, that you would via a YouTube. And that if you put all of the information that you needed on a subject in a YouTube video, it still doesn't make it digestible. Look how many lectures are there. Is it that the medium, the frame in which you are giving that information, the frame in which you're engaging in that with that information, changes it, so that like if I were to do it in a book or in a subscription service or something else, like it would change it in a way that would dilute it. So I'm just trying to have conversations. I'm going to be doing spaces on X eventually if anybody ever shows the fuck up. But what those are is that they're just live conversations where we're talking about the subjects of the week, and that if you're a member, you join on. Like or you just come and listen. You can also, I think you have to be a blue check mark to have a mic. I'm not sure, but either way, if you have questions, we can engage with them right then and there. And no filter, no limits, no whatever. I mean, if you're going to be an asshole, then you're going to be an asshole. So be it. The real world is full of assholes. If I were to try to pretend that you don't exist, well then, the fuck, I'm not teaching anybody anything. And also, fundamentally, too, I believe any good idea can survive challenge. So me, in exploring this, and putting it out there is putting my money where my mouth is and seeing, hey, can this survive challenge? Because if it can't, why the fuck should I teach it to you? Why should we explore it to see if it's real? But we're going to continue this conversation. I'm going to be looking at the ideas of perception more in depth the next time around. I've already done an episode on that, but we're going to try a little different way with this new format, and let's see how it goes. Again, self-generated podcast, X self-gen podcast.